Morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar with Sustainable Aviation Futures, looking to uncover a sustainable aviation and scale-up action plan. Thank you very much for joining us all today. This webinar will look to showcase the landscape of sustainable aviation, the role of finance, and impending ReFuelEU Aviation mandates, as well as showcasing the promise and exciting news that is expected throughout the year. Thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is being hosted ahead of Sustainable Aviation Futures EU. Apologies, there was an issue with my screen there. This webinar is being hosted ahead of Sustainable Aviation Futures EU, taking place in Amsterdam in a month's time from the 21st to the 23rd of May. Over the 3 days, over 600 senior level attendees and industry experts will come together to discuss innovation in sustainable aviation and prospects moving forward. Fantastic. This week marks the last week of the early bird event. To save over $400 per pass and secure some of the last remaining places, please contact Nick Cassidy on the email shown. It featured in Sustainable Aviation Futures EU are over 200 speakers in 9 streams of content over the 2 days, with 40+ hours of panel discussions taking place. The following companies and more have confirmed their place already, and we'd be delighted to have you there too. Lastly, this session is being recorded today and will be sent to you once complete in the coming days. Also, there is an ongoing Q&A chat. Please do keep the questions coming, and today's moderator, Shashank, will do his best to ask as many as possible at the end of the discussion. With that, I'm very pleased to welcome today's speakers. Jackie Medina, Technology Manager at Lummus Technology, Dirk Niemer, Director in Lead for Clean Hydrogen at PwC, Vanessa Lowe, Vice President of Energy Transition at Santander, and Dana Shukran, who is the Sustainability Partner at Wanderers Aerospace. I will now hand over to today's moderator, Shashank, who is the founder and CEO of Simply Flying. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. It is a pleasure to be leading this webinar. It's been a real long time since I've led a webinar, by the way, since the real world conferences came through. And having been the chairman of this conference last year and going to do that again this year, I think this was one of the best that you could choose to attend in Amsterdam this year if you want to know all things sustainable aviation. I remember having attended about 100 conferences just pre-COVID, and yet when I went to Amsterdam, I did not meet a single person I had ever met before, and that in itself was refreshing. It was not the same old people mingling together. There was a sense of newness and excitement, and that's what I think is going to be the case today in the webinar as well. Maybe I can have my panelists just introduce themselves before we dive in. A real quick introduction. Perhaps we can start with the ladies and then we'll end with Dirk.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. So Vanessa Lowe, I'm a VP in the Energy Structured Finance team here at Santander. A little bit about Santander, we're a leading project finance bank. Last year, we were the #1 globally and in Europe for renewables project finance. I would say over the past 2 to 3 years, we've had a real strategy of not only maintaining that leading position in renewables project financing, but also expanding out our capabilities into the energy transition sector. And that, of course, includes sustainable aviation fuel. We view it as a really core part of the infrastructure build out that's going to be required for energy transition and to meet net zero ambitions. So to that end, my role within the bank, I'm actually a chartered chemical engineer by background, and my focus at Santander is purely on energy transition. So sustainable fuels and sustainable aviation fuel sit well within my remit at the bank. And just to say that we're quite active in the space where we've been engaged as debt advisor for both SAF and SAF projects. So it's something that we're very involved in. Great to be part of the discussion today. Shall I hand over to Dana?
Thank you, Vanessa.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Dana Shukran. I lead the sustainability of Wanderers Aerospace. So also to talk about Wanderers and what we do. As a small boutique consultancy, we focus on, and in my case, in aviation. We work with really players around the lessor communities, the airline service providers, national institution, and also work with producers to develop and build in Europe. We think from carbon account to educational advisory strategy surrounding aviation, and we definitely have the opportunity and the chance to kind of have different perspectives, the different point of view of all the different players along the value chain, kind of understand the dynamic between them. Jacqueline, if you want to go.
Yes, well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Jacqueline Medina, Technology Director for Lomos E2Jet technology. And in the technical side, so Lomos is a technology provider for the petrochemical and refining industry with more than 100 years in the market. And my role in Lomos is support the development and commercialization of technologies, especially new technologies. I have been with Lomos 17 years, working on different technologies, and I'm chemical engineer like Vanessa too. So I have been in the refining industry for some time, 17 years with Lomos, also 17 years in my native country, Venezuela. So I started working there in a research and development center of PDVSA. Then I came to the US in 2005, approximately, and have been with Lomos in this role of technology manager for different technologies. So it's a pleasure to share with you the seminar today. So thank you very much. And go to Dirk.
Yeah, thanks. Closing this round of introductions, my name is Dirk Niemeyer. I'm director with Strategy N, which is the strategy consultancy of PwC. Within Strategy N, I am leading our clean hydrogen and alternative fuels operations, which kind of emerged over time out of the energy transition teams and the energy teams. I'm doing energy consulting since 25 years at about. We, with our global teams, are supporting clients in from market analysis, market understanding, to strategy development, and then down to operational project execution, project optimization. Also including legal advice, tax advice, target operating model definition, and also CSRD reporting, for example. And that also in the area of sustainable fuels, mainly, of course, aviation fuels at the moment, but also shipping gets a role into that, and road fuels as well. I'm doing that out of the Munich office, currently being in Rotterdam on the World Energy Conference. That's also why there might be some background noise. I apologize for that, and hope it's not too much disturbing. Looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, everyone. I really, really appreciate it. And we can't hear any of the background noise. We are much more interested in the foreground here.
That's good.
To kick off, I would like to start with a few facts. Interestingly, we timed the release of a report today by simplifying so that all of you on the webinar have it fresh out of the oven. And it's our first annual Sustainable Aviation Outlook report. And there are a few stats here. Of course, this is beyond just SAF, but there are a few stats here that stand out. One is that there'll be 44,000 aircraft by 2050, according to IATA, flying in the air by 2050. And you have to remember that most of these will be flying using today's technology. It's not hydrogen, it's not electric. That means they will be carrying some sort of fuel akin to jet fuel, some sort of substitute for jet fuel. And that's why SAF is critical. And this brings me to another statistic, which is 65%. IATA estimates that 65% is what SAF's contribution will be in 2050. I think it might even be more, because I'm not sure how fast other technologies may mature. And given the regional split, we don't have SAF in every continent, for example, right now. But the interesting thing is, if you look at point number 4, less than 1% of total fuel mix was SAF. In the research and the report we are releasing today, we have showcased all of the airlines that bought the most amount of SAF in the world. Surprisingly, there's only one airline in the world that has more than 1% SAF in 2022, and that's not even an airline. It's DHL. Air France KLM comes in second. And as Air France KLM, they still have less than 1%. But interestingly, Air France KLM bought 16% of the global SAF supply last year. 1/6, one airline group. Just a few stats. And finally, the scale-up opportunity we are looking at. We need 5,000 to 7,000 facilities. Oh my goodness. Just let that sink in. For aviation to reach net zero by 2050. Each facility is $250 million, at least. This is not, VC chump change. This is sovereign wealth fund stuff, if you're looking at the funding side of it. So I just wanted to set up the discussion here at what are we looking at and why this is so important, because SAF, I would not say it's a silver bullet, but SAF is very, very important in aviation's journey to net zero. So with that, let me come, ask my panelists to chime in with some of their views and their opinions. What is the landscape, how it's going? And perhaps I can start with Dana. Dana, let's start with offtakes. What is the result of offtake agreements directly with producers on the capacity of fuel suppliers to fulfill the mandate? Of course, we're starting with ReFuelEU and the mandate is there. Why don't we start there?
Yeah, I think the whole offtake situation is actually very interesting. I'm an academic by trade. From an academic point of view, I find it fascinating because offtake agreements that are being done now by airlines and different alliances definitely have a positive effect on the creation of a SAF market, right? They show and create demand. They contribute to the economy of the SAF market. They definitely enhance aspects of the supply chain that we are not yet familiar with, whether it's creating the infrastructure that is needed, whether it's to make sure that there is enough SAF in different areas, especially within Europe. So there's definitely a positive aspect to those offtake agreements that are being made in terms of the expansion of the industry. But I think when we look at it from a policy point of view, and the fact that the mandate actually relies on the SAF suppliers and not the airline, there is a certain backlog that may happen here where there is just not enough product. And there is also a lack of equal distribution of the SAF amongst both suppliers and airlines themselves. As you say, Shashank, there is a very, very small percentage of SAF being produced today. A year from now, we're going to have to jump to 2% in the European Union alone. Now, producers reassure us and say that this is feasible, but we only look at it from a theoretical point of view. We will have the quantity. How will that product be distributed? How will that product be split amongst, regional airports as well, which tend to kind of struggle behind, mid-sized airlines that are not, the flag carriers or part of the big alliances who do not have those offtake agreements today. I think there's a very interesting dynamic that's about to come online once those mandates start being regulated. So this is definitely something that the European Union will have to think about when this happens and come with a quick solution. But yeah, there's definitely pluses. It's those offtake agreements are crucial for the market and for the industry to develop. So we definitely need them, but we have to think about how can we make sure that those are done in a way that's advancing the entire industry, both the SAF and the aviation one.
A very fair point, and maybe this is a good time to bring in Vanessa from a financing perspective. I often, when I speak with airline CFOs, the question I get is, Shashank, my head of sustainability wants SAF. I can buy the SAF today, and I'll get 2 drops of it for the same amount, or I can buy offtakes and I'll get barrels and barrels for the same amount for some time in the future. How does project financing work, where you can buy offtakes which are much cheaper in the future, but they're uncertain? You can buy SAF today, way more expensive, not necessarily that you'll get it to. Mm-hmm. How does this work? And when you look at it from a financing perspective, which projects are the most fundable? What are some of the bankability considerations for SAF projects?
Sure, happy to pick up on that. I mean, so offtake for project finance is absolutely critical. I would say if we take a step back and we look at if we just look at some of the numbers, Shashank, that were shown earlier around the amount of capital deployment that's going to be needed in the sector, project finance is going to be a key part of that capital formation story for the deployment of these assets. And when you bring in project finance, there are certain requirements that lenders will have on projects in order to say that that project is bankable. What do we mean by bankable? Effectively, we mean that lenders going into the project have certain visibility over the stability and predictability of cash flows that are generated by the project. And to get that comfort and certainty around the cash flow profile of the project, we need to be sure of the revenues, we need to be sure of the costs, and we need to be sure of the project's deliverability. So when you mention offtake, it's a really key part, obviously. It's the key source of revenue for the project. So what lenders will be looking for a bankable project are those long-term secured offtake agreements at a fixed price or at a sort of an indexed price point is normally the way that we see the offtake market developing. Now, that can be something for projects. We are seeing that first mover and quite advanced projects are having some success with achieving those in the market, particularly if it's a lower cost production pathway like the HEFA process. Where we're seeing it being a bit more challenging is maybe for some of the higher cost pathways, and in getting airlines to have that appetite to sign on to long-term agreements for a product which is substantially more expensive. So we're seeing some interesting movement there. I would say the other thing to consider, and I think you mentioned the difference between sort of long-term offtake and maybe more sort of merchant offtake. Merchant offtake is quite challenging from a project finance perspective, unless you have got, and what we are seeing in some projects is more of a tolling type structure. Particularly, I'll go into this maybe in a bit more detail, like in the HEFA process where you have a lot of feedstock volatility, both in terms of volume and in terms of pricing. Some projects are going for more of a tolling type structure where a creditworthy third party effectively will take that feedstock supply risk, and then obviously they can then do what they want on the offtake side as well. So maybe that's a model where you can use project finance under a tolling agreement and get to more of a merchant-based feedstock and offtake picture. But that again is something that's relatively complex to implement. I think while we're on the topic of bankability, we've talked about offtake. I think I want to talk a little bit more about feedstock, because that's obviously going to be the key cost for a lot of the projects. And if we're looking at a BioSAF HEFA type process, obviously getting those long-term secured offtake agreements can be quite challenging. If we look at an ESAF type project that's using green hydrogen or ultimately renewable power and biogenic or atmospheric CO2, securing those feedstocks, again, particularly on the CO2 side, can be quite tricky. Often it introduces project-on-project risk where you've got a carbon capture development upstream outside of the scope of the project. Lenders will still be concerned about the risk of what happens if that project fails, and therefore the downstream SAF project, which was dependent upon that, would now be delayed. On the hydrogen and electricity side, the intermittency is another thing that would look at the technical maturity of the underlying technology, how it's contracted. I could probably go on, but I think that gives you a little bit of a picture of around how lenders look at the sector, and I think in particular for more novel technology pathways that haven't seen the same level of commercial deployment as perhaps the HEFA process, then certainly the technology and the suppliers and the performance guarantees are going to be another real consideration for bankability.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's a very, very comprehensive overview. I really appreciated it. Jacqueline, if we can bring you in here, because Vanessa talked about pathways. I'd be keen to understand, since you've rolled up your sleeves and you're making the stuff, how do ethanol to jet and HEFA technology economics compare?
Well, so you mentioned before the amount of SAF produced in the world is very small, it's tiny compared with the real amount needed to reduce the CO2 emissions to get a kind of neutral balance, right? See, currently, the amount of SAF produced in the world is mainly produced through the HEFA route. What is the difference between the HEFA route and ethanol to jet? So the HEFA route use fatty acids, is material or waste oil that might be available for restaurants or other sources. And then that material is converted to SAF by basically hydroprocessing. The process is less complex. For example, the E2Jet. On E2Jet, the raw material is ethanol, and that ethanol needs to be converted in multiple stages in order to create a material that then is hydrotreated and then converted to SAF. So then E2Jet involves more conversion stages. So it means you have to convert the ethanol to ethylene, then the ethylene is oligomerized to heavy molecular weight carbon species, and then those carbon species are hydrotreated in order to produce liquid fuel. When you are producing SAF from HEFA, then you only need your fatty acid, triglycerides that might be available from different processes. So you hydroprocess that material, and then you have SAF. So then you have two different processes, less complex, less investment cost because of the complexity of the process, because of the number of pieces of equipment needed for the conversion and for the separation of the product produced in the different stages. So economies are different, depend on the location, depend of the ability of the feedstock in certain region, then you might have favorable economies for one process compared with another process. So I would say in general, currently, the HEFA process economies are more favorable because there were feedstock available. But what is happening? What is happening is the availability of feedstock for the HEFA process is going to be scarce in a very short time, so it's limited. So the amount of SAF that we need to produce, as you mentioned before, is a massive amount, it's a huge amount. So the HEFA route is not going to be able to supply the current demand. So ethanol to jet becomes in a very, I would say, attractive option in the current days. Why? That is because the technology availability, the maturity of the technology is higher compared with other routes. And for example, there are many projects in many places that are under execution now to produce SAF, starting from ethanol. I can tell that in Lomos, we have different stages in our ethanol to jet process, and all those stages have been commercially proven. So it makes a big difference when you are thinking on implementing a new process, because if your commercial experience, if your investment is supported by the commercial experience of the licensor in different stages of the process, it reduces the risk for implementation, especially because you need to finance the project. Everybody knows that the capital required for the SAF project is also in the high level. So you want to minimize the risk for implementation. So you want to implement a technology that has certain mature status. And the status of the E2Jet technology, the maturity of the technology is higher compared with other pathways that are also available. So I would say HEFA has been implemented for these years. All units, other units also will be built in the following years on HEFA, but the amount of SAF that is going to be produced for HEFA is going to reach a kind of plateau based on the feedstock availability. And then the E2Jet technology will be the following pathway that probably is going to be implemented in a large scale. And in our side, at least Lomos, we are able to offer a solution that has been commercialized in the different stages, although it's not commercially, it's not in the commercial phase where we are not running from ethanol to SAF totally, but we have implemented the different stages independently.
I think I already like this panel based on all the different perspectives we are able to bring here. And thank you so much for that, Jacqueline. Bringing in Dirk, who's been patiently waiting. Dirk, we've talked about technologies, have finance. What about scale up? You know, how can we scale SAF up quickly? Like I shared earlier, we need 5,000 to 7,000 plants by 2050. That is an insane amount of scale up. How can we scale up? What are some of the barriers that you can share with us?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Shashank. And I think, I mean, some of the barriers have already been touched on. One is the offtake and the bankability, the financing of the projects. And the issue is that airlines typically buy fuel for the next 2, maybe 3 years, but not for the next 20 years. On the other hand side, the plant operators need the security for the financing to have a 20 years offtake contract. Let it be 15 years, let it be 60% of their offtake, but at least this certainty is required for the bankability. The costs are too high at the moment. So SAF is like at about 2 times the cost of kerosene. And even if this is just a fraction of the cost of the airline, and it's with the admixture is just a fraction of the cost of the fuel cost, it still adds upon the already risen transportation cost, aviation transportation cost. Another topic we see is that the missing or the different regulations in the world are hindering a global ramp up, and also the missing acceptance of certificates trading and of book and claim frameworks is hindering the fact that you could separate physical flows from financial flows and then sell the certificates to those that would be able to pay for that, but still produce the SAF where it's the least cost. That might be Asia, that might be Middle East or whatever, depending on the technologies. And then also there is the technology ramp up. And your question is what can be done to speed this up? I mean, it can't be speeded up like everybody wants it, probably, because it's a process that takes time. But what could be done from our point of view, and we also released 2 reports on that, is first of all, there need to be OPEX subsidies and offtake agreements, maybe issued by intermediaries that offer the producers a decent price that they can make money with these factories, probably not endlessly money like some of the producers do at the moment. It's reasonable profit, but they need to have the security. And intermediaries could, like H2 Global, for example, in Germany is doing that, could offer long-term contracts at a reasonable price, maybe an auction model, and on the other hand, sell the SAF to the off-takers in short-term contracts. And the price gap that will be there at the beginning needs to be covered by governments or whatever, and can be refinanced, for example, via taxes, let it be CO2 taxes, aviation taxes, whatever, that are existing in Europe. And these models are already discussed. So this is one thing. Another thing that I think is very important is the introduction of the certificate trading and book and claim systems. So you can produce wherever it's the cheapest, and you can virtually, but not physically, ship it to where it's needed most. Let it be regulation or let it be market offtake. And these 2 things, for example, would really help to speed this up, because you can realize better prices, and on the other hand side, really efficient markets.
Thank you, Dirk. And it's really good to get that overview from you. One of the things is, if you look at future technologies, is PTL. And we have to agree, it's not just aviation who wants this fuel. There are other industries as well. Dana, if I can have you chime in here, maritime and shipping, we have a lot of lessons learned about the absolute reduction of emissions rather than on the use of alternative fuels. Given the different life cycle emissions of different SAF, how would that impact more advanced fuels like PTL?
Yes, so absolutely. So the maritime industry has recently had their own mandates and have joined ReFuelEU and the ETS in the past year. And their requirements are slightly different to aviation. And I think there's something very crucial there, in that for the maritime industry, the mandates relate to their absolute GHG, so CO2 specifically emissions. So instead of looking at individual paths or individual journeys, individual ships, they look at their summed up emissions, and they have to reduce that by a certain percentage every year. And so this is something that we don't have, because we are so basically for maritime, it doesn't matter for them whether they go with ammonia or green ammonia, whether they go with green methanol, whether they go with electrification. So long as their overall emissions are reduced, they're fulfilling their requirements. This is not the case for us, where we are actually obliged to purchase SAF without actually looking at which SAF we are purchasing. And as we all know here, Vanessa touched on this and Jacqueline touched on this, not all SAF is created equal. Whether we look at EFA, whether we look at ethanol or alcohol to jet, whether we look at power to liquid, all of those have different pathways, all of those have different life cycle emission and carbon footprints. But more importantly, all of those have different price tags. And so if our sole requirement is just to buy SAF, there is no incentive other than the sub-mandates, which come in much later. There is no incentive to today purchase a product such as power to liquids when you can buy HEFA. And so by slowing down the demand for those products, we are basically slowing down the development and the scaling up of those technologies. Now, just to kind of add up on what Doug just said now, in terms of the scaling up of those products in those facilities, power to liquid, he touched a lot on the demand aspect and how can we ensure that the product is bought. But there is a lot there as well on ensuring that the product is actually made available and building a refinery. And I can say that from first-person experience, building a refinery has nothing to do with the technology. It has a lot to do with the ecosystem around the refinery. Something as simple as making sure that the renewable energy is there and it's available at a constant level, making sure that feedstock are available constantly, making sure that the transportation is there, making sure that the feedstock arrive. You know, if you look at power to liquid, the hydrogen is produced, that it's stored. There's so many aspects to that specific technology, which we all kind of know we will rely on because it's the only one that doesn't have or have as much of a feedstock limitation. It's actually the one that has the most complex ecosystem. So I think it's really kind of interesting to see how in maritime those limitations don't exist, and how we as an industry are going to choose which technology to kind of bet on, depending on the mandates and how those technologies come about.
Vanessa, how do you bet on what to finance? You know, you're funding a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure you get these all the time. How
Sure.
are you gearing up to support SAF project financing?
Sure. I mean, to answer the first part of the question, I mean, I would say Santander is relatively agnostic. We are very interested in supporting energy transition, green project finance. We don't see it as our place necessarily to decide, you know, we're limited. As Dana mentioned, we're sort of potentially limited resources like baseload renewable power and green hydrogen could best be used. So we work with projects all across the energy transition space, you know, as long as they are beneficial to the environment and that they have a reduction in CO2 footprint. So we work not only across SAF, but we do hydrogen derivatives, CO2, capture, transport, storage, biofuels. So we're quite active across a whole lot. And we basically, I think one of the things I want to mention is that for project finance, particularly in these novel sectors and not just in SAF, one of the really important things to consider is that when we're doing first of a kind project finance, we do really want to make sure that we support the right projects. And by the right projects, I mean the ones that are well structured and have a high deliverability profile, because essentially we want the first projects that are financed to be successful, because that will build confidence in the sector and that will open up further liquidity and appetite amongst lenders to really accelerate progress going forward. So that would be my only criteria is that the first projects we want to support, we want them to be well structured. And that segues me in quite well as to, you know, what Santander are doing. So we're working, as I mentioned earlier, quite closely with our clients and with developers. So our team essentially is both an advisory team and a lending team. So from an advisory point of view, we work closely with our clients as they're developing projects. So we'll be involved from quite an early stage, so that when projects eventually get to the point of reaching FID and financial close, because of the upfront work we will have done, we want those projects to be in a position such that they will be deemed as financeable.
Thank you once again. I really appreciate it. That was enlightening. Vanessa, and Jacqueline, Coming back to you, what is the estimated time to build and initiate operations for a ethanol to jet facility? Now that we know from Vanessa what it takes for financing, what does it take? Let's say you secured the financing. How do we build this? How long does it take?
Yeah, so in general, for building a unit, in my case, starting from the feasibility study, executing basic engineering, EPC, it might take 3-4 years, more or less. It depends on the complexity, it depends on the region, but it might take 3 to 4 years to start doing the feasibility study, doing basic engineering, to do the first evaluation and check if the technology and the project itself has incentives, and then the engineering procurements and construction is executed, and then the unit started up, and we check the performance guarantees to verify that the plan is delivering what it was supposed to deliver. So yeah, it might take, I would say, 3-4 years in a good scenario. Some countries or maybe some places run faster than others, and depend on the urgency, depend on the economies of the project too. So I would say more or less this is an average timing.
So that's good to know. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the valley of death. When do you hit that really tough part in that 3 to 4 year time span where you really need that financing to go over the hump? When do you hit that?
Yeah, so after moving on with the feasibility study and the basic engineering, so you have a better estimate of the economies of the project, and then you can get additional financing for the following steps. So actually, I would say when you finalize basic engineering and you start EPC, by finalizing your EPC, you submit for internal approval in your organization to get the budget for the final execution. And then you have all the information also to get that external financing if needed.
Thank you. Before I go back to Dirk for the next question, I do want to share with all the attendees that you can type questions in the Q&A section at the bottom. I think we've got 15 or 16 questions now. And once I'm done with this question for Dirk, I will be entertaining some fun questions from the attendees as well. Dirk, we talked about financing, we talked about costs, but right now there is a significant green premium when it comes to SAF. SAF is more expensive than jet fuel. Question for you is, how do we overcome these high prices? After all, jet fuel is already 30% of an airline's total cost. If you tell them, oh, tomorrow you're going to be buying something that's 60% or 70% of your cost, and your cost that part of it will double, it's not going to fly. Yes, you want sustainability, but you want sustainable economics for the airline as well. How do we deal with this green premium?
It is a difficult question. And the good news is that we are not switching to 100% SAF tomorrow. Even the quotas that we cannot fulfill at the moment are in the single-digit numbers, like 2%, 2.5%, 5%, 6% till 2030. And this is difficult enough for Europe to fulfill that, because this requires significantly higher productions than we have at the moment. Nevertheless, if you assume that, let's assume 30% of your cost will rise by 10%, then you have a 3% cost increase. That is a difficult situation for the airlines, because the airline profit is around single-digit profits. And it is difficult to cope with that. But as said, it's single-digit admixture rates at the moment. It will scale up and grow up over time. When doing that, also hopefully the technology scales down the cost, and the SAF will get less expensive over time. So this is a counter effect to the growing SAF demand or growing SAF admixture rates, hopefully. And the next thing is that we must keep in mind that airline or ticket prices vary significantly, even without SAF, and might be rising by 200% due to other factors. And SAF is just one contribution. It might not even be the highest contribution. So we shouldn't over-exaggerate the impact of SAF, especially in low admixture rates on the ticket prices, because this also creates some fear in the market saying we don't want to have that because it makes traveling more expensive, it's just for the rich people, then that is probably not true if we think about 2, 4, 5% mixture rates. And the last thing is, there is a refinancing option because there is a ticket tax already in Europe, and you could use that to bridge the gap between fossil fuels and renewable fuels, and at least lower the cost burden, and use this tax and these levies in order to build some bridges into higher volumes that can be admixed, and then scale effects to bring the cost down.
Thank you, Dirk. I'm going to dive into a few of the attendee questions right now. There's one that is specifically for Jacqueline, and potentially Vanessa can chime in onto this as well. What is the typical capex for an alcohol to jet plant? Oh, you're on mute, Jacqueline.
Oh, it depends on the capacity. So it depends on the capacity of the unit. So you're looking for cost per ton of SAF. It depends on the capacity anyway, because large scale, the capex can be reduced because of the benefits of going to large scale. So I wouldn't like to say a number because also depends on the region. So, but it's high capital intensive because of all the stages involved in the process. And it varies depending on the capacity.
It varies. Vanessa, do you have a number for us?
No, sorry, nothing to add on top of what Jacqueline said. She's completely right. It varies, and it depends on how large the facility is. If I'm correct, I think there's only one commercial alcohol to jet plant so far. So there's probably not that many data points out there for commercial scale facilities just yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
yeah.
No, and that unit is tiny. The unit that is running here in the US is a small unit.
Okay. There's a question on pathways and different pathways to get to HEFA. From Juan Gomez, there's a question on palm oil. This is interesting. As a sustainable source for a HEFA pathway. I keep hearing about a new pathway every week. I think the latest I heard was coconut to jet. That was last week. I kid you not. And palm oil is something that has been discussed in Malaysia and Brazil. Do you think these are feasible? Obviously, these are not covered under CORSIA today. But do you think, Dirk, you are vigorously shaking your head in denial? Do you think there's a way?
I mean, not in Europe. I don't see it in Europe. It's not allowed according to Annex 9 of the RED 3. And it's there was just a scandal with used cooking oil, so to speak, in the road fuel market, where Germany has huge premiums for greenhouse gas reductions. It has been 400 euros per ton of CO2. Then obviously China stepped in, producing lots of used cooking oil-based, HEFA-based fuels, shipped that to Europe. The factories have not been properly certified, probably. And the rumors go that this is all based on palm oil, which we don't want to have in Europe. So I don't see palm oil, at least for Europe, as a solution at all.
What about different countries? Like in this case, Brazil is mentioned. I understand countries like Brazil and Malaysia, for example, have a lot of palm oil. Other countries, like India might be really good with waste to oil. Do you think different countries will have different pathways, even if they're not certified? Maybe, Dana, you want to take that?
I think in a theoretical, ethical world, these kind of pathways could come about, because at the end of the day, you want a pathway that's adapting to the environment in which you're producing the SAF, right? So if you are a country that has a certain natural resource that you don't use, that does not compete with foods, that is local and that makes sense to use to produce SAF, then it should be considered. However, as Doug just mentioned, ethical is not really on the table. So people try to take advantage of the system and try to, get around and find loophole in how to do things. So if done right, why not? But the issue is, how can you make sure that it's done right? So I think,
Very interesting. A concept I will be introducing and talking about in Amsterdam. Let me give you a sneak preview, because we are talking about it, is a term I came across called green colonialism, in which rich European countries tell the rest of the world what is good and what is not, what is right and what is not, what is certified and what is not. And poorer countries with other feedstocks may suffer. So I think we don't have to answer it right now. It is a hot topic, and each country wants its own energy security.
I can tell you from experience, like there are countries that are looking, you know, just in the US, let's take the US as a perfect example, you know, even though they are, you know, the leading first world countries that, you know, lead the way. If you look at the US versus Europe, the US has an abundant resource of crop-based fuel through corn. So they use their corn to produce SAF. That SAF is not approved in Europe. Now, why should it? In Europe, you are not allowed to use crop-based feedstock to produce your SAF, because in Europe, we don't have those natural resources. So it all has, I feel for me, it's also the same goes with the book and claim system. It all works in a context where it makes sense. And it's done with a mindset of, we are trying to find solution. We are not trying to take advantage of a system. We are not trying to find loophole, you know. So it really is a question. And, you know, like sugarcane is also a massive topic of discussion. Is sugarcane a viable feedstock? In certain country, absolutely, because that is their natural resource. Can that fuel then be exported to Europe? I'm afraid not. So it is definitely a valid point of discussion of how can we make sure that those things are certified and are done in a way that benefits everyone and not makes things worse.
And I totally agree, Dana, because the European regulation aims at protecting change of land usage, protecting the tank versus plate debate, and all these things. And it might have overshot the definitions. That might be true. On the other hand, it's really difficult to set up proper definitions. And Shashank, I'm really looking forward to your proposal on that. Would be very interesting because I understand that there is sustainable feedstock in different amounts in different regions of the world, but we need also to avoid that kind of not the rich Europeans exploit the other countries, but the rich people within the country exploit the country and harvest the rainforest in order to plant palm oil trees and then and so forth, right? And that's the difficulty on that. But really looking forward to that.
Very interesting. I'm now looking forward to this discussion. So any of you who have not signed up for the conference yet, today I believe is the last day for the early bird pricing. And I know there are only that many seats, having been in that conference room before. So you might be, standing room only very shortly. So make sure you buy your tickets. There's a very interesting question from Sudeep Das, which is around blending of fossil fuel or ethanol or hydroprocessed feedstock. His question is, current infrastructure is compatible with SAF. Do we need separate infrastructure for 100% SAF? Currently, it's 35 to 50%. From an infrastructure perspective, do we need to change anything?
See, I can say something. See, regarding 100% SAF, so currently the blending is until 50% because there are certain properties that the jet fuel used in the airplane needs to comply. So when we're producing SAF, there are certain specifications for the SAF material that is going to be blended. One of those specifications is the concentration of aromatics. So it's important that there is certain concentration of aromatics that has to be in the final jet product. The current amount, the SAF material that we produce now doesn't have enough aromatics to be in the jet fuel. So the current SAF material needs to be blended with jet fuel, fossil jet fuel, in order to comply with the aromatics concentration. So that is the main limitation between upon others, but this is one of the important limitations. So it's not because of the infrastructure, it's because of the properties. So it's because the quality. The quality has to satisfy certain specifications, and those specifications can be, let's say, adjusted when we are blending the SAF material, producing from HEFA or from ethanol to jet or any other pathway. We have to blend with the fossil jet fuel. So infrastructure, is not a limitation.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for jumping in. Still sticking to 100% SAF, I'm sure everyone on this who's attending this webinar knows that Virgin Atlantic conducted the 100% SAF flight. In November last year, I bet most of you also know that a week before that, Gulfstream also conducted a 100% SAF flight. Before that, Branson obviously was not on, and hence not everyone knows about it. To get to 100% SAF, we've had these one-off demonstrator flight. What is needed? And maybe Vanessa and Dirk, you can chime in on this. What do we need for 100% SAF flight going from where we are today, which is a blend?
Sure, I'm happy to add my 2 cents. I mean, I think it's a combination of things, right? It's regulatory and getting the regulation to such a place that you can get to 100%. It's on the technology side, so I understand that, and Jacqueline will know a lot more about this than me, but I understand that the airplanes themselves might need some modifications or new types of engines to deal with those aromatics that are present or not present, as the case may be, in sustainable aviation fuel. So there's a technical engineering and there's the changeover of the airline fleets, which takes quite a long time as airplanes are sort of 20 to 25 year assets. So that takes quite a long time. And then it's, of course, the production. So everything we've discussed today in terms of the challenges and the scale up of the production. And it's not just financing. Financing is one part of the puzzle there. So I think, 100% is a very admirable target, and hopefully we get there. But there's a lot of steps in between that, in order to get us to a position where we're looking at 100%.
Dirk, anything to add?
As you asked me, no. I mean, I acknowledge and admire your aspiration, and we learned that the 100% technical implication is we have to have higher aromatics concentration in the SAF. But we are so far away from that it's, from my point of view, the question is way too early. We have less than 1%. It'll take us really an effort to come to 2%, 5%, whatever. Really, I think the focus should be on scaling up to, let's say, 10%, 20%. And if we're there, then let's think about the other thing.
Thank you for that. Let's talk about ticket prices. And that's a question I think a few people have asked. SAF costs more, airline costs go up. They're trying to pass this cost on down to passengers. One, is it right? Should passengers be paying for this green premium? And second, what is going to be the impact in ticket prices? Is the price of flying going to go up?
I feel obliged to answer on that one. Sorry, because we did a study on that, and you can read what we calculated, and it's in the lower double-digit percentages of ticket costs. I'm not talking about prices. There's a lot of confusion between the cost and the prices, because the prices is something that the airline does under pricing optimization, revenue optimization, yield optimization targets. Pricing is totally different from cost. But if you think about cost and the impact of cost, and if you say an airline has 30% of their cost, which leads to the ticket price at the end, it leads to a cost-based ticket price. 30% of the cost is fuel. Now let's assume 10% admixture. It's a huge value. It's higher than the target for 2030, 10% admixture of SAF. Let's assume that the SAF has the double the price of the conventional fuel. So 10% of the 30%, which is 3%, will double, which is 6%. And that's the impact on the cost. Now, that is money, of course, and flying is expensive anyways, and everybody looks for the cheapest flight, but still it's less than 10% increase. This calculation shows. And this calculation is not far away. It's directionally correct. I think it's not the exact calculation. It had nothing to do with pricing. It has nothing to do with prices, but it's the cost-based calculation of what happens if you mix 10% of SAF at double the cost of fossil fuel.
I can share a very specific case study. Singapore, a country I grew up in, recently announced at the Singapore Air Show in February, where they said that starting 2026, Singapore, the country, not the airline, will be imposing or instituting a SAF levy on all departing flights, which is a SAF passenger levy. This will range from $2 to Singapore dollars on short-haul flights to up to $12 on long-haul flights like Singapore to New York per ticket one way. Now, I don't think that if as a passenger, I'm paying 24 Singapore dollars, which is about 15 US dollars, for a round trip flight from Singapore to New York to take care of SAF on that flight. I don't think I'll be thinking, oh, let me fly via Kuala Lumpur or Bangkok instead to avoid that levy. I don't think it will deter any travelers. It's not a deterrence. Now, does it pinch me if on a short haul, it's $2 to $6 to fly from Singapore to Manila or Singapore to India or China? I don't think so as well. But at the same time, I think because the government is taking the lead here, it sends a very strong signal to two players. One is Neste, which has a local production facility that there will be constant demand and is government mandated. And also to airlines, which are looking to up their sustainability creds, that if we fly into Singapore, we know that SAF is in the mix. And it's checking a box without necessarily thinking, who's going to pay for this? How are we going to finance this? How will we lose customers? What's the look to book ratio? All of those things just go out. And I feel if governments can take lead, it will be better. For example, here in the UK, I live in London. We have the air passenger departure tax. Everyone knows about the APD. The interesting thing is it currently goes into the bottomless pit that is the HMRC. But if we pulled it all together, we probably can take care of the entire SAF mandate of the UK if it goes to buying SAF, but it doesn't currently, right? So I think governments need to come in. We are speaking here as an industry. There is a need.
That's what I'm saying. I totally agree, Shashank. That's so cool that Singapore is doing that and Europe is doing the same, but just on the flights, not on the passengers. And the issue here is that a flight from Lufthansa to New York is taxed for the full flight. A flight from, let's say, Turkish Airlines to Istanbul and then to New York is just taxed for the first segment of the flight. That creates imbalances that are not very good for the market, for the airlines, for whatever. So if you put that on the whole travel distance per passenger, that's way better. And then it's exactly as you say. The impact, the cost impact is there, but it's not changing the game. And it simplifies a lot of things.
Absolutely. We have 2 minutes left.
Sorry, never mind then. I was just going to say the thing is that we always scared of adding that cost to the passenger, but the fact is, drawing back to the Maritime, they added an ETS cost to their pricing, an ETS cost that's actually above the ETS price, and so they just forced that cost on the customers, and the customers went with it, and any profit that they make from that cost, they put into fuel. So I think rather than asking the passenger if they want or not, the airline industry just has to say, we are doing this, and we are doing this to make things better. And I think passengers will embrace that shortly. Sorry.
You know what? We have 1 minute left. I'm going to squeeze one last in from our dear friend, Jonathan Wood from Neste. What are our views on non-CO2 effects especially of fuel? Because it's usually about 2 to 3x higher than just the actual CO2 effects, primarily due to the aromatics, which are driving this non-CO2 effects, contrails, heating, things like that. So can we work with OEMs to find solutions to use paraffinic SAF with low or no aromatic content? I know, Jacqueline, you touched on this earlier. Any thoughts? Any final thoughts? We are right on the hour. Jonathan, you'll have to get this answered live in Amsterdam. We'll be there. Harry, if you want to close up, please.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Shashank, thank you for your moderation. Jackie, Dirk, Vanessa, and Dana, thank you all so much for your insights into the topic. Some agreement and some disagreement as well, which is always a really good thing as well. As Shashank said, you can hear all of these conversations plus many, many more in Amsterdam in next month from the 21st to the 23rd of May. And very much hope to see you all there, and you can hear from various of our speakers and all of the companies present today in one form or another. So with that, as I said, we can share the LinkedIn profiles and all the questions that have been taking place today after the call. So please do reach out to any of the speakers. But if nothing else, then thank you so much for your time today. Thank you all to the speakers once again, and have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you.